prioritizes its initiatives at the expense of congressional priorities. For example, it's difficult to justify the proposal to reduce humanitarian accounts by 25% at a time when significant needs remain, particularly in Syria and Africa. USAID is doing good work to improve the health of millions of people around the world, yet there's a decrease overall for many of the life-saving global health programs. You also propose a dramatic reduction in biodiversity programs that support important conservation activities and critical efforts to combat wildlife poaching and trafficking. I hope we can work together on these and many other budget issues. Next, I want to raise some concerns about how USAID does business. Since I joined the subcommittee 5 years ago, I've heard that the United States must do more to address aid effectiveness. Of course, this is an important goal, but not when aid effectiveness is translated as providing more assistance directly to developing countries and organizations that may not have the capacity to program the funds. In many of these places, corruption is also a serious issue. I have concerns about this and other elements of your USAID Forward initiative. I question the assumption that foreign governments and local organizations are more effective implementers than U.S. organizations. I'm also cautious about their ability to manage U.S. taxpayer dollars. That's why the fiscal year 2014 State Foreign Operation Bill strengthens standards and requirements to ensure proper oversight. I appreciate the work we've done together to increase oversight of direct assistance to foreign governments since I began including conditions in the fiscal year 2012 bill, and I hope we can do the same for local organizations. Dr. Shah, these are just a few of the issues I hope we'll get to discuss today. I want to close by thanking you and the men and women of USAID who are committed to solving some of the most difficult global development issues around the world. All of us on this subcommittee understand and appreciate your work and their work. I'll now turn to my ranking member, Mrs. Lowy, for her opening remarks.
Welcome, Administrator Shah, and I want to thank you for your leadership and tireless work improving the lives of vulnerable people throughout the world. In deference to my chair and friend, I'll be brief. Dr. Shah, you may recall my support for development assistance, yet I was disappointed to hear that FY 2015 budget request again underfunds basic education at $534 million, which is unacceptable. I expect to see a much higher level of commitment than the administration has demonstrated to date. Additionally, I'm still anxiously awaiting the official budget figures for several programs, particularly family planning. As you know, family planning programs reduce maternal mortality, promote women's rights, contribute to the stability of communities across the globe. It's impossible to achieve food security, build democratic institutions, or sustain health outcomes without basic literacy and communication skills. In my opinion, the administration routinely underfunds education, impacting the sustainability of our development dollars. I hope you will provide greater details on our family planning and education budgets. I'm concerned about the reduction in the budget for drug-resistant tuberculosis. Drug-resistant TB is a highly contagious airborne disease that respects no borders, threatens the health and safety of the United States. Why would you slash TB control when reports indicate that new treatments, vaccines, and diagnostics are all necessary? Finally, the press reports from last week on the Cuba program highlight my long-standing concerns on the potential politicization of development activities that place both the programs and people at USAID at risk. It's important that you clarify for this committee the nature and risks of these kinds of activities. USAID should be using its resources, which are generously made available by the American people, to respond to current challenges overseas, like we did with the Asian flu, HIV/AIDS, food insecurity, and so much more. I look forward to hearing your testimony and ask unanimous consent to place my full statement in the record, and I yield back.
Without objection. And thank you. We're trying to get through, there's a good attendance, particularly when we have multiple subcommittee hearings today, and so we're trying to get through before votes. Thank you. Dr. Shah, please proceed with your opening remarks. I would strongly encourage you to summarize your remarks so we leave enough time for questions and answers. Your full written statement will be placed in the record.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Congresswoman Lowy. And members of the committee, I'm very enthusiastic to be here to discuss with you President Obama's FY15 budget request for USAID. USAID's mission is very clearly to focus and partner with all types of organizations and all parts of society to help end extreme poverty and its consequences around the world, and to promote resilient democratic societies. Your efforts to support USAID over the last 4 or 5 years have helped us do some extraordinary things together. You've helped us rebuild our staff by more than 1,000 people. You've helped us rebuild our budget and policy operations and to put in place a monitoring and evaluation system that allows us to be accountable and sophisticated in how we pursue our mission. Your support has enabled us to launch the U.S. Global Development Lab, which will help to elevate the role of science, technology, and innovation in helping to accelerate the goals we hope to achieve. And your approach has helped us lead around the world a series of public-private partnerships that leverage our investments with private sector resources to stretch American taxpayer dollars and get better results. This year's budget, which is presented in the context of overall fiscal constraint at the top line for the 150 account, and in particular for foreign assistance, given some of the major security investments that have been proposed, still maintains a commitment to core and important priorities. These include a nearly $1 billion investment in Feed the Future, which has helped to now reach 7 million farmers and is moving 12.5 million children out of a condition of being chronically hungry and helping them achieve self-sufficiency. It includes nearly $2.7 billion for child survival, which I continue to believe is the most efficient return on investment we make as the U.S. government when it comes to serving the needs of the world's most vulnerable. And it includes significant investments in education, water, and energy, all of which are the subject of new comprehensive strategies that govern our work and new ways to evaluate results and report back to Congress and the American people on what their generosity is achieving. I also look forward to discussing the pressures created by 3 Level 3 emergencies this year: Syria, the Central African Republic, and South Sudan, and note that our teams are involved in leading global humanitarian responses in each of those settings. Given the shortness of time, I'll look forward to the discussion of the topics that were raised in your opening statements. And I'd like to conclude just by noting that this year I had the opportunity to present some thoughts at the National Prayer Breakfast. And I remain convinced that if we can continue to build a broad tent of public support for America's efforts to lead development, health, and humanitarian efforts around the world, and if we can continue to pursue what are sometimes difficult reforms to ensure that we're using our money wisely, reporting on results, and improving the cost effectiveness of our investments, that America still has the capacity to lead the world in ending extreme poverty and serving the needs of the world's most vulnerable, and that over time will continue to make us safer, more secure, and more admired. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. I think people on this subcommittee believe the same thing, or they wouldn't be serving, and so we just have questions on how that occurs. I'm going to just have one question, one topic, and that has to do with Afghanistan and watching the elections with millions turning out. That's really a testament to what's been done. It was a very good thing to watch. We know the new president may or may not sign the bilateral security agreement. That remains to be seen. We've had important gains made in health, education, women's rights, things that Mrs. Lowy was talking about. But while the staffing plan in Afghanistan is going down, the administration's request for assistance to Afghanistan goes up. So the few questions I have, I said, first, in light of the ongoing security challenges and corruption issues, what kinds of programs are you going to support with these funds in Afghanistan? How do you also hope to have the level of oversight that this committee expects when there's less staff planned for 2015, and how can these programs be implemented in a way that keeps U.S. personnel and our development partners safe? And the safety is a great concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And I just want to highlight that for 2 to 3% of the cost of this war, USAID development investments have helped ensure that 8 million kids go to school, including 3 million girls, have helped to generate the most rapid reductions in child death and maternal death anywhere in the world, have helped to build out 2,200 kilometers of road infrastructure that creates economic connectivity that gives the Afghan people a chance to have a brighter future, and have helped to both build the Independent Election Commission and support the election processes that we saw this weekend were a powerful demonstration of a more optimistic future taken on by Afghans themselves. We will continue, even in a more challenging security environment, to make the investments that we believe are required to help Afghanistan achieve peace, security, and some degree of prosperity and social justice, with a priority on focusing on women and the important gains that have been made in sustaining those gains, but also with the priority of, and we've carefully reviewed through a sustainability review all of our programs. We're going to continue the agricultural programs that make a big difference for the rural economy, which is still 60% of total employment in Afghanistan. We'll continue support for schools and higher education because that's central to girls having opportunity. We'll continue our health programs. We are looking at our larger infrastructure projects, and we want to make sure that we can both get eyes on those projects and that they can be sustained as well, some of which requires other partners picking up a bigger component of those efforts. And overall, I was with the team this morning by video conference with the ambassador and our mission director. You know, they are committed to visiting projects and programs, to maybe paying the higher costs it will take operationally to have the security and capacity to get out there. But we're going to have an evaluation system that allows us to get American eyes on most major efforts where that's required, and supplemented by all kinds of third-party data, including satellite imagery on crop yields, to just local Afghan partners reviewing and visiting projects and programs regularly. The Accountable Assistance for Afghanistan initiative we set up 3 or 4 years ago has been successful at improving accountability for aid and assistance in Afghanistan, and we intend to continue that effort, although adapting it a bit to highlight the safety concerns you've raised.
And the last had to do with how do you keep the people that are there safe if it's not an agreement, a bilateral agreement, if there's not that agreement, then what do you do about security?
Well, a BSA is very important, and our team contributes to the larger security team that is trying to pull that together, and we'll see what happens after the election. Assuming that Afghan security forces have the kinds of abilities they just proved that they had over the past weekend, we're confident that we, with all of the supplementary efforts, can have our people visiting projects and programs in a safe manner. We're not going to take undue personal risks. We have already been challenged as an agency and a government in losing key members of our team who went out to visit projects and programs and were attacked and lost their lives. We're not going to put our people at undue risk. But all our people out there are taking some degree of risk already because they believe, and this is work that is critical to our national security. And after the conduct of a highly costly war over more than a decade, I certainly hope that USAID and our country and our Congress can continue to support the efforts like keeping those girls in school, getting those women into civil service, helping different parts of the country have economic opportunity, and supporting agriculture that are going to be critical for the next decade.
Thank you. Mrs. Lower.
Thank you. Both our interests and challenges around the world do not generally respect country borders. Yet our democracy, governance, and development activities are inherently country-by-country specific. As we witnessed during the Arab Spring, events transpired differently in each country, particularly the tumultuous aftermath of the 2011 revolution in Egypt. Given recent unrest in many countries with which the United States has strong military relationships, I hope you can address how support for civil society and development versus stated national security interest is determined in the administration and specifically in USAID. And I'll follow up with a couple of quick questions so that you can discuss the issue, which I think is so important today. How does the USAID implement democracy programs in repressive countries while abiding by the Brownback Amendment, which prevents foreign governments from having control or veto power over democracy assistance? In which countries has this been a particular challenge, and how have you dealt with these cases? Is the foreign government allowed to review U.S. democracy programming plans through prior consultation or other checkpoints? For instance, could the government in countries that repress women's rights pre-select or obtain the names of participants in your programs? Using the national security lens, how would results be measured and evaluated? Is focusing solely on strategic interests a detriment to human rights concerns, or is it all part of our interconnected policy strategy? And I would appreciate it, given so much of the news today, if you could put this in the context of one of the programs that's been practically on the front pages, Sons in EU. Who is responsible for developing this program? And do USAID's activities and democracy programs put other development programs at risk by increasing the perception that everything USAID does is political in nature? And if you could also care to share with us, in which countries does USAID's democracy work pose the greatest risk to our other programs in health, education, or agriculture? If you can clarify, I think it would be very helpful.
Congresswoman, thank you for those comprehensive questions, and I look forward to the opportunity to address them. First, on civil society. The United States and America is deeply concerned about the closing of civil society space in country after country. Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry have both started and pursued a strategic dialogue on civil society, of which USAID is a part. And in nearly every country we work in, we support civil society actors, whether it's small women's cooperatives that are part of our Feed the Future program, or whether it's the Ukrainian organizations that documented the human rights violations that took place during the protest period that we're all acutely aware of. That history of that type of support, which has been ongoing and around the world, has been an important part of how America provides assistance and partnership, so that even when we were in Senegal, the President met specifically with the civil society groups we supported to hear their stories of how they were able to leverage our support to build a culture and a process that allowed for a real democratic presidential transition there when it didn't look like it was going to happen. America's proud of that, USAID is proud of that part of our portfolio, and it's an integrated and integral part of how we provide assistance around the world. With respect to the democratic governance portfolio, the Brownback Amendment, and your references about foreign government review, we disclose all of our programs publicly. The program which I'll talk about in a moment with respect to Cuba is one example, but we notify Congress of all of these programs. In country, we have these transactions publicly available on foreignassistance.gov, on our website, and the grantees. There's no covert activity that takes place. That said, we don't share the participation data with governments. We don't give governments the capacity to they may sometimes express displeasure, but we don't give them the capacity to shut down our programs by cherry picking one or two that are promoting civil society or democratic governance that they insist that we shut down. I was thinking about that in the context of what's going on in Uganda, where a new law, criminalizes certain activity that we pursue to treat patients with HIV/AIDS that are gay or lesbian. And we work with governments, but we don't funnel our money through them in large amounts, and we don't give them veto power over specific projects and programs. With respect to Cuba, and I appreciate your asking the question, the purpose of this program, like the purpose of other similar programs, is to support civil society and to provide platforms to communicate amongst the Cuban people. Any representation that the purpose of the program is different from that is inaccurate. We have programs like this in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, throughout the world. And they are conducted in consistent with the manner of the law. The GAO report on the Cuba program specifically highlighted the improved management practices at USAID and complemented our execution of this program. And that was after a thorough review, not just of the program overall, but of this specific contractor and this specific sub-project with Mobile Accord. With respect to your question about how do those programs whether those programs put at risk other efforts in health and hunger and those types of issues, it's obviously not a critical issue in Cuba because we don't have, per the Helms-Burton Amendment, the capacity to do those types of other programs there. But with respect to other parts of the world, we have just said, and the President said this, Secretary of State has said this, and the prior administration has said this, that when America engages around the world, we are going to project through that engagement some basic values. We're doing that right now in Uganda with respect to the antiretroviral treatment of people who are gay or lesbian. We can't disassociate our values from our work. And one of the core elements of our values is to support civil society, is to allow freedom of expression, is to connect with those who are vulnerable, and to ensure that the benefits of our overall aid and assistance reaches the most vulnerable within society.
If I could just follow up with one other question. Alan Gross has now spent more than 4 years in jail in Cuba after trying to broaden access to the internet there. Could you respond to that?
Yeah. So Alan's incarceration in Cuba is wrong. It is inappropriate. It's inexcusable. Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, our Undersecretary of State, the President himself have all engaged on this issue. And I know that there have been a broad range of activities that the State Department has pursued to secure Alan's release. Wendy can brief on that in a secure setting and in a classified setting. I will say on our end, I think about the Gross family all the time. And we are sometimes discreet in how we do our work, whether it's to save lives in Syria when we're doing medical treatments of victims, or whether it's in the execution of this program, precisely because we want to protect our people from being exposed to those types of risks.
I'll call on members alternating between majority and minority based on seniority of those present when the hearing was called to order. I want to remind members that you have 5 minutes for your questions and responses from the witness. A yellow light on your timer will appear when you have 2 minutes remaining. If time permits, we'll have a second round of questions. However, we know that votes are going to be called during the time that's allotted to this, so I ask you to be particularly careful about your time. And I know we all have multiple subcommittees. I do too. So I'm going to call on Mr. Rooney and then turn the chair over to Congressman Dent, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Dr. Shaw. I want to talk about Jordan and the Economic Support Fund, which we've learned a lot about this year, not only from the King's visit, but with all the intelligence and news that we've seen about the refugees going from Syria into Jordan and what the challenges that Jordan's having to deal with with regard to that, and specifically one of the programs that I think is important, what I'd like you to comment on and sort of give us an update, deals with the fact that some 36% of those refugees are going to be of school age, 5 to 17 years old, which accounts for almost 150,000 boys and 131,000 girls. So this program, which goes to Jordan to help with educating those kids, is something that I think will certainly help Jordan and help deal with the issues that they're going through right now. But can you talk about it, talk about the successes, some of the challenges, and also specifically with regard to how it's working to counter or try to educate children out of the whole terrorist realm, hopefully. That's one of the end goals of that program.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your asking about Jordan. Over the last several years, the United States has provided $1.7 billion in support to Syrians and Syrian refugees who are at critical vulnerability with respect to the crisis that has been ongoing there. In addition to that, we've had our ongoing program with Jordan, and that has been supplemented with a major loan guarantee effort and then accelerated investments in areas like education to help deal with the flood of refugees. There have been more than 2.5 million refugees coming out of Syria, and Jordan and Lebanon, I think in particular, have been the two countries that have taken by far the highest number and percentage of Syrian refugees. As you point out, 40 to 45% are school-aged children, and we have large education programs in both Jordan and Lebanon. So in both settings, we have worked to help create opportunities for Syrian kids to go to school, while also maintaining access to the same schools, of course, for the host community children. And you can imagine this is very difficult. If any of us had kids in school and all of a sudden class sizes were going to double or triple overnight because of a refugee crisis, that would be a tough sell in the United States. So we've launched an effort that we call No Lost Generation, and we've worked with a host of international partners from the Gulf states as well as from other donors to try to get more resources for education in Jordan and Lebanon, to try to create a double shift system where Syrian kids can go to school in the afternoons in those schools, and try to make sure that we don't lose a whole generation of kids to strife and poverty and a lack of education in an environment where there's a high risk that these kids go the wrong way should they not have any meaningful opportunity in life. And I hope the American people can take pride in the fact that the United States and USAID have been by far the largest and the global leader at providing humanitarian assistance throughout the region, now reaching more than 7 or 8 million people.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. This time I'd like to recognize the gentleman for California, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Dr. Shah. And I've got to follow up with you on the Cuba question. This Cuba Twitter program was instituted, I guess, shortly after Alan Gross was arrested. Now, I've visited Alan Gross twice. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been very involved in the discussions between our own government and the Cuban government. And quite frankly, there have been maybe 5 or 6 individuals on our side that I've talked with. This is the first day I've heard and learned that Wendy Sherman is part of that. And I just want to ask you, first of all, who is the lead negotiator or person that we should work with on our side? Secondly, you say that we don't engage in covert activity. Okay, we may not, but some of us believe that you do, and that the whole goal is regime change, and we just happen to disagree when you say this is just to promote discourse among civil society, but it is, in effect, most of the times, the goal is regime change. And thirdly, with regard to Alan Gross, and we've talked about this over and over and over again, he was a subcontractor. Now, whether you agree or not, Cuba has certain laws just like we have certain laws in our own country. If, in fact, a U.S. contract or a subcontract violates the law of another country, they're subject to whatever follows, whatever laws, require in terms of prosecution. I don't agree with what has taken place, and I think it's inexcusable that Alan Gross. But to say that we weren't part of this in terms of allowing Alan Gross to work on a project, and you didn't disclose in the contract that he could be subject to arrest based on the laws of another country, I think is outrageous. If a person is going to subcontract work under these democracy programs, they should know what risks they're taking. Now Alan is on a hunger strike. We don't know where that's going to lead. And so some of us really want to try to move this process forward so that we can get him out. And so I'm asking you once again, one, who's the point person? Two, have you all revised some of these contracts so that contractors and subcontractors know when they're engaged in these democracy programs that they could be subject to arrest based on the country in which their laws, in which they're violating their laws? And thirdly, for the life of me, I don't quite understand you're not seeing this as covert activity and regime change, and I'd like to hear why you don't see that.
Sure. Well, thank you, Congresswoman. I just want to, on other topics, but on this one as well, thank you for your engagement, your support, and I've appreciated the chance to learn from you and work with you. On this in particular, let me say a few things. First, look, we care about Alan, about his family, about Judy. I mean, what they've had to go through is extraordinarily wrong. And Wendy is the lead. She may have a team. Obviously, State Department's a big place, but she's the undersecretary that I have worked with. And I know that she would be willing to and able to articulate to you our efforts and our strategy. They obviously have been unsuccessful to date. And they include specific actions taken recently by the highest levels of our government. The second is with respect to is the program covert. This program has been notified in congressional notifications and congressional budget justifications every year since 2008. The fact that we're discussing it in this forum and that it is an unclassified program illustrates that this is not a covert effort.
Well, I think
the
AP
GAO
revealed that. It may not. Okay.
Well, the GAO reviewed this
bit of
project and made a judgment that this was consistent with the law. And we are discreet.
Which it is.
And we are discreet, thank you. We are discreet with the implementation of a range of things, not just in the democratic governance space, but we've provided 250,000 medical procedures and surgeries inside of Syria over the last 3 years, some provided by Syrian American doctors. We're not waving the American flag at those posts, and they're already targets, and many have already lost their lives doing that work. So we have to balance and conduct this work in a manner where we are making some effort to protect those who carry it out, and that's why we do some of these things discreetly. I do want to address your point about the, how we think about this in broad terms.
And the contracts, why you would subject a U.S. citizen to arrest and not disclose their subject to arrest.
So we do inform and clearly communicate the context, the risks, and the personal responsibility.
No, but Dr. Shah, you don't communicate the laws of the other country that they could be in violation of.
We highlight the risks, and that requires describing that. But you don't say that you could be
subject to arrest.
Right, but look, I'll
engage in these activities.
Well, no, we do. We describe the context. It was not done in Alan's case. I agree with that. That was in 2008. It was before I arrived.
And we worked with you to try to get this straight.
Yeah, and we've improved the management of this. But I do want to say one thing about that. Right now we have people providing antiretroviral drugs to gay and lesbian patients inside of Uganda that are also taking new risks given the criminalization of providing services in that context. And it's tough. I'm not prepared to tell them to cut those folks off from receiving life-saving assistance.
I'm talking about
time has expired.
Those engaged in these programs
but that's what I mean.
That they're violating the country's other laws and they could be subject to arrest, just so they know.
Yes, okay. I appreciate that. I think that's right. I think we should be communicating the risks to our implementing partners, and we do. Now we do with
Now
our
you
partners.
do, but not when Alan
absolutely.
was arrested, and that's got to be part of the
No,
discussion.
but we have since I got there, yeah.
Negotiate, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Recognize myself for 5 minutes at this time. Good afternoon, Dr. Shaw. The FY15 request includes a $90 million cut to USAID's global health programs relative to inactive levels. This includes a $10 million cut to maternal and child health programs, yet within that line item is a $25 million increase for the U.S. contribution to the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, or Gavi. I'm just concerned about where the administration plans to offset the increase for Gavi. Could you provide information on which maternal and child health programs you're proposing to cut?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you for your support and your leadership. I will say on the global health budget, our FY 2015 budget is a small increase compared to the request we made in 2014. And I thank Congress for its generosity in 2014, and I continue to believe that our investments in global health and child survival are amongst the most cost-effective investments we make around the world. This year's budget environment overall has been very challenging, with the top line coming down on the 150 account and a shift in resources to pay for major security investments around the world. That said, within this portfolio, we will make the $200 million investment, if we have the support of Congress, in Gavi. We believe Gavi is highly effective at getting low-cost vaccines and new vaccines to kids who critically need it. And then we will have the resources to work on a supplemental basis to make sure that we're reaching those same kids with a whole range of other interventions, from supplementary feeding to malaria bed nets to chlorhexidine and other new products and technologies we've helped develop. I can have my team follow up on precisely where the redirections have come from, but in general, we believe over the next few years we'll be able to accelerate dramatically the achievement of results in child survival, and this budget will enable that.
Thank you, and I look forward to receiving that information from your staff. On the issue of PEPFAR, the use of the antiretroviral drugs is critical to both treating and preventing HIV infection. The double impact of the antiretroviral treatment is also reflected in the new WHO guidelines, which recognize that earlier treatment can result in fewer transmissions and prolong life. In recent years, PEPFAR spending on antiretroviral drugs has decreased and totals much less than 10% of all PEPFAR spending, despite millions of people in need of and not receiving antiretroviral drugs in PEPFAR-supported countries. What actions will the federal government take to reverse this trend and ensure that PEPFAR meets the statutory requirement of spending more than half of the program's appropriations on treatment and is targeting its spending to maximize the cost-effective impact of antiretroviral therapies?
Well, thank you. I want to make a few points on this. First, the President laid out a clear goal of 6 million patients on antiretroviral therapy, and as of December this year, we had achieved well beyond that goal. I believe it's 6.3 million in that context. The second is we share the treatment burden and the cost with countries themselves and with the Global Fund, and a number of other partners, but really countries themselves and the Global Fund. And what we've seen over the last 5 years is a shift of resources where countries are putting more of their own resources in, and Global Fund is putting more directed resources in as well. The third is the cost of the antiretrovirals have come down dramatically. So as a total, as a proportion, the antiretroviral itself is a lower cost. What we now know is required to have a high-quality program that is preventing deaths at an optimized rate is having effective treatment initiation earlier and having effective adherence efforts over the long term. So the all-in, more comprehensive treatment costs should clearly meet the statutory requirements. I can follow up with more specific detail on that, but those have been the major trends in PEPFAR, and I believe they offer the opportunity to create an AIDS-free generation per the blueprint we've published with our colleagues at the State Department.
I have a series of 7 questions, which I will submit for the record, except for one. I'll ask you to respond, your staff to respond to those at a later date. But worldwide, deaths of children under 5 years of age, mainly from preventable infectious diseases, has dropped from about 12.6 million per year in 1990 to $6.6 million per year in 2012. That's probably one of the greatest stories in the history of human health. What more can the U.S. do beyond what it's already doing to help prevent the deaths of the next 6 million?
Well, thank you, sir, for your question. And the reality is the opportunity to end preventable child death is, I think, the most profound and most cost-effective opportunity we have in global development. 2 years ago, we brought together more than 80 countries, civil society, faith-based institutions, and got everyone to sign a commitment to end preventable child death by 2035. And we have set targets and goals. We created country strategies and measurement plans. We've now in the process of reviewing 24 country programs and restructuring and redefining the investment portfolio in those programs to accelerate lives saved over the next 3 years. And at the end of June, we'll be unveiling the new investment plan in those 24 countries and trying to bring many more of our partners, including countries themselves, to that task. Final thing I'll say about this is the most important trend in this space has been getting countries themselves to take more ownership, direct more of their resources, and focus with more business-like, results-oriented investment on ending preventable child death. In countries like Ethiopia, India, Nigeria, South Africa have taken that on and are leading that charge. And that's why our investments in child survival are now 15% of the total global investment, and we want to continue to get others to do more.
Thank you. My time's expired. Like this time, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah, good seeing you again. Let me talk to you about your OEs, your operating expenses. From the present estimate to the request for 2015, y'all had a $243,000 decrease. And I haven't seen all the countries, but I can look at the Republic of Mexico. And I know when we had Secretary Kerry, I had asked him why he had reduced his 2015, and he told me he didn't. And he was wrong. His staff a week later sent me some information, and actually they had gone from $227 million to 115, a 49% decrease from the prior year. From there also, under one of the accounts that you handle, we had specifically increased Mexico from 35 million to 45 million, and then again it got reduced again on the request. Again, I've talked to the ambassador. He told me to talk to you about the 10 million. Are y'all handling that $10 million increase that the committee gave last time?
Well, thank you, Congressman. Let me just say, we have a very strong program in Mexico that delivers really important results, particularly on justice sector reform and support with implementation of crime management policies. One of the things that...
I don't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
Sure.
You hear a lot from members of Congress about the violence and the border and this and all that. Why would y'all decrease money? Especially when we had just increased it by 10 million, y'all came back and decreased it by 10. And again, if you're addressing violence, and everybody talks about the violence that we have to our third most important neighbor, when we talk about trade, why would y'all decrease this when there's violence and we keep hearing about the situation in Mexico?
Well, sir, overall the budgets are very, very tight this year. And the larger narrative on the budget is that there's been a big shift to security investment that puts downward pressure on foreign assistance. Within that, we have tried to maintain core priorities. And in the context of Mexico, the FY15 request is $47.5 million. And my team can kind of follow up on the numbers, but I think it's $47.5 million. That is higher than the 45 requested in FY14. So we are trying to maintain support for this effort. We're trying to focus the effort on the Merida program and the efforts to support citizen security.
The whole thing got cut by 49%. And if you get pressure, that's why I started off with your OEs. You only reduced it by 243 million. Actually, in Washington, D.C., y'all have your Washington operation is over about $425 million for your operations. This is for USAID. For central support, that's another $248 million. So I can understand there's pressure, but when you only reduce your administration costs by $243 million, $243,000, I'm sorry, $243,000, it gets us to think about this. Let me ask you, because I got about a minute and a half, a question I've been asking, and I think Senator Tom Harkin has been asking y'all, and I believe he still hasn't got an answer for over a year, and I haven't got an answer for a year also. The Scholarship for Education and Economic Development, or SEED program. I know there's, y'all looking at another plan, but we still haven't got any details on that plan. I think the senator asked you about a one-year extension so you can develop something in June of this year. In a couple months, some of those programs are going to last, but there's still no plan from y'all out there. Could you tell us what your plan is for the SEED program, and if whether you're willing to delay at least some of those lapses so we can at least get an idea what you're planning to do, and anything you want to tell me about the President's initiative, what your direction is for the Small Business Network of America?
Well, thank you, sir. On SEED, let me just say this has been a highly successful 25-year program to bring students, as you know, from the region to the United States. And it costs significantly higher than $45,000 per student per year. And so as we've looked at the program going forward, in consultation with our community college partners here, we're constructing a new vision of it where more of the education takes place in country, and where the community colleges are engaged in partnerships with host institutions in country to upgrade their skills and to allow for some connectivity. What I've talked about with Senator Harkin and others is there was a miscommunication or there was a perception that we were abruptly ending the program before the new one comes into place. That's not going to happen. We're not going to, there's no student that's here on a 2-year program that's going to be sent back after a year. All of that is going to be fully transitioned before they go forward.
For the record, on June, if the program lapses, that's going to be extended?
No student that is currently in a program is not going to have the opportunity to live out their full 2-year commitment. And that, I think, is the right decision and consistent with your guidance and the senators. Let me also note that Christy Vilsack, our special coordinator for education, has been consulting widely with the community colleges themselves, has been on the Hill a bit, but would be eager to follow up with you to describe what we're thinking, to get your feedback, to ensure that current program partners are excited about the new program. And I think it's an opportunity to increase the number of kids we touch and support, and also build stronger ties between American institutions and those in the region in a manner that will get all the program partners enthusiastic with essentially the same amount of resources going forward. So it's an effort to just modernize what's been a very successful effort. We don't want anyone to lose out in the transition, and we want to work with you to make it a great program again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize a gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes, Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah, how are you, sir? Just two questions before that. One quick point on the issue of the issue of the Twitter, so that Cubans could use Twitter in a country that access to the internet is frankly forbidden. I know I keep hearing a lot of folks talking about that it was this strange, covert, NSA program, and yet, if you look at the President's budget when it was created, they talked about exactly what it was about. I know a lot of the outrage coming from particularly one member of the Senate, and yet that same member of the Senate put language in the Senate bill, Appropriations bill, last year, asking USAID to do, frankly, a similar program in Iran. So again, I just keep hearing all these things, and I was a little bit shocked by the story from AP. I don't tend to criticize the press, but it's trying to come up as if this was some covert, strange operation, when in fact it's been in print, it's been looked at, reviewed by everyone, including GAO. My only concern there is I hope that we are able to do that, because it was a huge success for a while, and then obviously it became too big too quick, and all of a sudden kind of like outdid its funding. I'm just hoping, Dr. Shah, that we look at options like that and things like that, not only for Cuba but other places where we need to try to break that internet and communication blockade. That's not for you to answer, just I'm hoping that you're looking at the success of that, and then we can hopefully try to replicate that. 2 points. I was recently, Dr. Shah, in Haiti with a couple of my colleagues, and we visited a USAID housing project, the Damier, I know I'm not pronouncing that right, housing site. It was subject to a GAO report. I'm not going to get into what we saw there about the GAO report. I am just going to bring out another little issue. We all know that Haiti has an issue with the fact that they've cut down a lot of the trees just to cook charcoal. And so there's an initiative, which I think is meritorious, to see if you can get people off of charcoal onto gas. What we noticed, however, right away, because gas is more expensive than just buying, you can buy a couple of chunks of charcoal. And we noticed right away that some of the gas stoves that were provided by programs were frankly just used as shelves. And we saw the charcoal stoves right next door. And so this is a question. Have studies been done as to where that kind of program, if I'm assuming there's other places where we've had similar issues, where it's worked, where it hasn't worked, why it's worked, where it's worked, why it hasn't worked, where it's worked. I would imagine that there would be some things that you could kind of just pull off different studies before you attempt one. I fear that the one in Haiti, which is very well intentioned, may not have the desired effect. And that's, if you want to just address that first.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. And on that specific effort, it is important that over time, Haitians stop cutting down trees and using them for charcoal. That is just, and there's been a huge amount of evidence to demonstrate how disastrous that is for their core productive agricultural economy, for example. So as part of the reconstruction effort and in providing 65,000 families with housing after the earthquake and in the reconstruction period, we have had some of these pilot efforts to do community conversion to LNG gas cook stoves. And what we've learned from prior efforts is that training for food vendors, for schools, for households is critically important. Initial subsidy for the LNG canisters is critical to get the new system up and running. That ongoing kind of household level community efforts to help people talk to each other and kind of move en masse both creates a market and it creates enough social infrastructure that people can see their neighbors using it and be more comfortable with that practice. Some of the efforts in this regard have been successful in Haiti, others have not. And so we are in the process of evaluating all of these, learning and adapting the programs. But it's something we've got to keep trying to do. And you're right to direct us to look at best practices, which are pretty prevalent in many other parts of the world, where people have successfully made this transition and try to adapt those learnings to Haiti. And
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm glad that you're aware of that. And there are areas where obviously it's not going to work, and we have to make it work. You're absolutely right. I'm just concerned that we are making sure that it's the best practices. Other thing, Dr. Shah, we visited a hospital, which is where Project Medishare is, at Bernard Demev's hospital, and incredible amount of volunteers, including Americans, who are there. And I know they're experiencing some electrical issues, some power issues. I don't know if your folks have had an opportunity to look at that, but it's a hospital that obviously is very important to Haiti. And we can get you some more information. And lastly, well, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, so maybe we'll have a second round to talk a little bit about Venezuela.
Okay, thanks.
This time I recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah, it's good to see you, and thank you for your commitment, and I enjoyed talking with you in my office a couple of weeks ago. Just so that we're clear that Cuba is not a partisan issue. Let me echo the comments of my colleague from Florida, Mr. Diaz-Balart. We have fought hard in a bipartisan way for funding for civil society programs, and also fought equally as hard in a bipartisan way to ensure that through GAO review that accountability was a part of those programs, so that we weren't just throwing money into a black hole and not really seeing any results. And for a while, we did have concerns that the civil society programs that we were funding were just going to organizations with not a lot to show for it. It's pretty clear that this particular program, for lack of a better term, Cuban Twitter, did have results and did connect Cubans to one another and showed promise. So, I really while I don't want to endorse regime change here in the subcommittee, I think there's no question that the United States position is and should be that human rights be something that we stand up for as a nation, that we use our vast resources and influence to help people who are being persecuted, and that there's no question that that persecution and human rights violations are ongoing in a nation just 90 miles from our shore. So, just saying. And I'd appreciate you if you have anything to add. But I wanted to ask you specifically about faith-based organizations and support for family planning. You know, we often hear from opponents of access to family planning that their opposition stems from religious beliefs. But I know I hear all the time from religious organizations, across all religions, I might add, from the Jews to the Methodists. Even in Afghanistan, there are some religious leaders who are realizing that family planning has become critical for the health and economic well-being of that country, as well as in a variety of African countries as well. So can you talk about what USAID is doing to work with faith-based organizations in the field to deliver reproductive health services? Also, what more can we do to support those efforts and get the word out that not only is family planning not incompatible with faith, but that the two are in fact mutually reinforcing? Because I think there is a disconnect here inside the Beltway between those that seem to condemn family planning as somehow being not in line with faith-based values.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for your tremendous leadership on these issues. I appreciate the question, and I may save Cuba for perhaps later in the hearing and speak to the family planning issue first. As you know, our programs in family planning are entirely voluntary, that we have very strict controls to ensure that we do not fund abortion, that we are the world's largest supporter of voluntary family planning for very poor communities, and it is a critical element of empowering women to take control of their own lives in settings where they otherwise don't have that opportunity. We know that the Obama administration, relative to the one just before, has increased the commitment to family planning on the order of about 40% and sustained that over a course of a very difficult budget environment. And we know that we actually have kind of the world's, we've built partnerships with USAID in the UK and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to bring others into a really results-oriented approach that can take advantage of the two big realities of these family planning programs. The first is that this is one of the most cost-effective ways to save mothers' lives during childbirth, and in places where childbirth is still a highly risky in terms of mortality, that's critical. And second, that it is about the most cost-effective way to save a child's life as well, with proper birth spacing contributing not just to reductions in infant and child mortality, but also to investments that family make in kids' education. So we've been pretty effective, I think, in our family planning programs around the world. They're done under, as you know, careful scrutiny. But we've been proud of these efforts, and we've been proud of the fact that we've gotten so many other partners, including the Gates Foundation in the UK and Australia and countries themselves, to take ownership of many of these and increase their resources considerably through an initiative we all call Family Planning 2020, I believe.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize a gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Yoder, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you again. We have discussed this issue before. I wanted to just go back to a topic related to the Food for Peace program and how it affects American Kansas farm producers all across our districts who are part of producing grain and other products, meat products, et cetera, that are sent around the world to help deal with world hunger. It's been sort of a two-part relationship. One, we're helping feed hungry people, and two, we're putting American producers to work. These products come with a label saying, you know, furnished by the American people, or you know, being furnished by the people of the United States of America. It's a source of pride, I think, for our country when we see those bags of grain with our label on them go to the right places. The President's budget would allow 25% of that aid, as I'm sure you're well aware, which is equivalent of $282 million, to go to cash assistance as opposed to food assistance. In in light of the Farm Bill debate, in which Congress had a chance to litigate this issue and determined to keep the food aid programs the way they are in the status quo, is the administration going to continue to move forward with this budget request as opposed to changing the underlying law, but to use the appropriations process to change how we administer the dollars? Do you agree with my concerns related to less American farmers being helped? What are your thoughts on that? And I'm very concerned about it. And are you concerned about an erosion of public support for the program if more of the dollars are direct aid dollars as opposed to dollars that are coming back to pay farmers and producers in the country?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I appreciate the points that you raise, and the reason President Obama put forth the proposal last year and this year to reform and modernize this program is because we're facing an acute crisis in terms of humanitarian crises in a number of places that strip our current ability to provide humanitarian services. And we have a proud Food for Peace history. We have reached more than 3 billion people over more than 50 years. But frankly, the value and the size and the consequence of the program has been diminishing over time because of the higher cost structure of a model of assistance where we buy food here, put it on American ships, send it into communities, sometimes sell it in communities to raise cash that we then give to NGOs. That's not as efficient as it used to be, and we believe that a modest incremental reform will allow us this year to reach 2 million additional hungry kids in Syria, Central African Republic, and South Sudan, not cost America anything additional, and continue to support farmers. And here's why I think we'll continue to support farmers. This whole program is only 0.56% of total agricultural exports by value. Most of the major partners we have in the program will continue to be partners, and will continue to be partners at a very large scale. We're talking about 25% of $1 billion in a $1.4 billion program. Second, we're now moving the product mix that we're sending from America into more specially designed medical foods, whether it's peanut paste or NutriButter, and those higher value products are appropriate for the American food system, which, as you know, is the best and most advanced in the world. And so I think America is always going to have a huge role to play. But I think our farm partners in particular understand the challenges here. The National Farmers Union has expressed support for the President's reforms, as has Cargill and a number of companies that people might have thought would not. And over time, I think we'll build a broad enough tent to continue to allow America to actually be the leader we need to be in these humanitarian settings. And we'd appreciate your support for these modest reforms that will continue to make sure people see that American contributions are what are fueling these strong responses in the Philippines and South Sudan and Syria.
Well, in light of our efforts around the globe, whether it's the Food for Peace or food aid programs or whatever it may be, as we add more money into the system, the potential for fraud and corruption and misuse grows. Dollars are easier to probably fraud the government out of than a bag of grain, although that happens as well, in many cases as significantly. So I worry as we move it into dollars as opposed to grain that might become more troublesome. There have been lots and lots of accounts, media reports, IG reports about fraud and waste in Afghanistan aid, malaria drugs being sold on the black market that were not going to the intended recipients. I'm sure you've been well aware of many of these situations. Could you outline for us where our biggest fraud risks are? What % of our food aid and our foreign aid as part of USAID is being frauded or not getting to the right recipients based upon your analysis, and what are we doing to cure that?
Thank you. We have, I think, a very strong program in place to oversee how we spend resources and mitigate the risks of fraud, waste, and abuse. There are times, I'd say war zones of all kind increase the risks. So active conflict environments in Afghanistan, provided trucking food around Somalia through al-Shabaab controlled areas a couple of years ago. Those are the kinds of environments that have the highest risks for waste, fraud, and abuse. The reality is most of our program, the great majority, are not provided under those contexts and those terms. And we have a very strong oversight system that includes the Inspector General. It includes very clear reporting. For any resources we provide directly to local partners or countries in particular, we provide them on a receipt basis, so we evaluate the receipts and the costs they've incurred and then reimburse them for incurred expenses. And, you know, I've worked at the Gates Foundation, I now work here. I understand accountability is critical, and we've increased our accountability systems very significantly in places like Afghanistan. In general, we almost, I mean, we don't overinvest in it, but we do create a lot of bureaucracy to track every penny. I understand why that's important, but I think we're covered in terms of having a very, very strong accountability system when it comes to waste, fraud, and abuse. And as it relates to your last comment, I'll just say that we have now been, since the Bush administration, implementing local and regional purchase in food aid. And we have not only found no higher rate of waste, fraud, and abuse there, we've actually found it brings the cost down, gets the food faster to people in need, and often is the more appropriate mix of products that they need, like in the Philippines response.
Well, I look forward to working with you to ensure that we improve the integrity of these programs. I think nothing probably angers our constituents more than seeing American
Time's
dollars
expired.
wasted on a program where it's not
Mr.
intended
Yoder.
to be overseas. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Recognize Ms. Lowy for a moment.
Just want to apologize. Unfortunately, there are 4 hearings at the same time, so I have to leave. And I just wanted to make 2 quick points, and I know we'll have the opportunity to continue this discussion. First of all, as you know, I'm not very happy with the basic education dollars. I think it's absolutely essential that we raise that number and continue to invest in basic education. Secondly, I referred to the situation in Cuba before. As you well know, we had a problem in Pakistan where immunization workers were perceived as being helpful in tracking down Osama bin Laden. And this caused a decrease in immunizations because the general population did not trust them. So I think as we proceed, and I understand that everything that has happened is all on the record and notices, et cetera, I think we have to constantly weigh the investment in development programs and how they can be sabotaged by some of the work that may be perceived as very noble in democracy programs. And whether it's in Cuba or other countries, this is an important priority, and we have to continue to discuss the impact of one on the other. So I thank you again for clarifying the actions of USAID, but I don't think we've resolved the challenges that we have before us. Thank you.
Should I respond? Okay. Well, I'll just say thank you, Congresswoman. I'd say briefly on education, we've had the chance to discuss this, and I just want to say on the record how much I value your leadership and admire what you've done to help our country lead on this issue all around the world. The 2 things I'll say on that is our FY15 request is higher than the FY14 request. Not as high as it should be. As you well know, through our Room to Learn initiative, the partnership model we have with some other funders is really helping us get leverage and better results, and I'm very appreciative of your support. And I take your comments on Cuba and Pakistan and look forward to future discussion.
I recognize the gentleman, Mr. Schiff, for 5 minutes, and we go to the second round. We'll do 3 minutes for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director, welcome. It's great to see you again. And I apologize if this is the subject of an earlier question, but I wanted to raise Syria with you. According to USAID figures, well more than 9 million people are now in need of humanitarian assistance in Syria due to the devastating civil war there, including over 6.5 million internally displaced persons. I understand and appreciate that the United States is continuing to work through all possible channels to deliver aid to those in need in Syria, including through the United Nations, international and non-governmental organizations, and local Syrian organizations. I'm also encouraged to see in your testimony that USAID is providing life-saving aid to more than 4 million people across the country. While all of Syria's people have suffered, its minority populations, and especially Syrian Christians, are most at risk. These are some of the oldest Christian communities in the world, dating back to the first decades after the death of Christ. About 2 weeks ago, the town of Kasab, which is predominantly Armenian Christian, was attacked by al-Qaeda-linked fighters who crossed over from Turkey, resulting in the town being emptied. Many of its residents were descendants of the survivors of the Armenian genocide, and this attack has greatly increased the apprehension of all of us concerned about Syria's minority communities. Can you tell us what efforts USAID is making to identify and provide for Syrian minority communities? Many of them, I understand, resist seeking refuge in UNHCR and other NGO facilities out of fear for their safety, and thus are more likely to be internally displaced persons.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your laying out the consequences of this horrific situation. And the reality is, while we are reaching more than 4 million people inside of Syria, there's still 3.5 million. They're not being reached by anybody because they're inaccessible because of the conflict. 220,000 of them are literally in besieged areas where food and water are used as a weapon of war. And we saw what they looked like when they left homes a few weekends ago. With respect to minority communities, especially in the north, most of our services to those communities are provided through NGOs and international partners, not primarily UN agencies, and are provided through cross-border activities. That allows those communities to be reached, and it allows more effective access, and the UN only started some of those cross-border activities very recently in the last few weeks, especially across the Turkish border. Expanding cross-border humanitarian support is a critical part of the UN Security Council resolution. I would just note that Valerie Amos of the UN reported on the first month of the resolution's implementation and said that the Syrian regime had not lived up to the standards of access on what we call cross-line inside of Syria and cross-border across neighboring countries access issues, and so we continue to work through that with the Syrians, with others, to make sure we're doing as much as we can. But it is insufficient by definition, and I'm very sorry to hear about the communities in Kasa, and we'll ask our teams to specifically follow up on that.
If you would, I'd appreciate it if you could let me know in particular what you're able to find out about the refugees from Kasab. Some of them have taken shelter in Latakia, others in, I understand, some of the elderly across the border in Turkey. If you could let us know what can be done to help provide for them. It is admittedly a very small subset of Christians in Syria who are being targeted because they're Christian, which is in turn a very subset of the humanitarian disaster in Syria. But a great many constituents are deeply concerned about this as we approach the Armenian genocide anniversary. It's particularly painful to see yet another Armenian community ethnically cleansed from its homes. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move to the second round of questioning, but for 3 minutes only. First, I recognize Mr. Diaz-Balart for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah, just very quickly about Venezuela, if we may. I don't have to tell anybody here about what's going on there, where you have folks hitting the streets mostly students trying to regain their freedom and their democracy. You have some of the main opposition leaders in prison for over a month. You have mayors thrown in prison. You have the press being censored. But specifically to your budget request, I believe it includes $5 million ESF funds. My understanding is that the budget request of the last few years for Venezuela has actually been seen a gradual reduction in democracy and civil society programs, despite the reality on the ground in Venezuela. And since the congressional budget justification has not been released yet, as far as I know, well, a couple things. First place, because of what's going on in Venezuela, do you expect an increase of above the 5 million figure? Number one. And number two is, since the CBJ has not been released, if you can provide us with some additional details as to your request for democracy programs throughout our hemisphere, and specifically for Venezuela. And Mr. Chairman, in time. You see that?
Thank you, Congressman. As Secretary Kerry recently noted about the Venezuelan government, They've severely limited freedoms of assembly and expression, precisely as you articulate. USAID supports Venezuelan organizations, civil society broadly, to support citizen advocacy, pushing for public accountability. In fact, over the last 45 days, those partners have done quite a lot to identify, document, and report on human rights violations, as our partners have done in Ukraine and in some other parts of the world. The $5 million request is consistent with the FY14 request. I don't have the CBJ number with me, but my expectation is it will be close to that, probably not higher, because the budgets are under extraordinary pressure in 14 and 15. And throughout the region, we will continue to support these programs. We've had a long conversation about this in this session, but we do think that investing in democracy, rights, and governance, support for civil society, precisely in those places where civil society is harassed and prevented from operating, is particularly important. These are longer-term investments that don't often yield very strong and immediately recognizable short-term results. But having seen the long-term efforts pay off in many parts of the world, I think it continues to be a modest but critical part of how America presents itself in the context of USAID programs.
At this time, I recognize the gentleman from California for 3 minutes, Ms. Lee.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to Cuba again. I'm equally as committed to the promotion of human rights everywhere in the world, just as my colleagues are, whether it's in the 70 countries that criminalize those with HIV or AIDS, or here in our own country where we should really be ashamed of the mass incarceration of African American men. What many of us don't agree with is an embargo against countries like Cuba, 90 miles away, which prevents normal foreign and economic relations where our government and our own citizens, mind you, cannot travel nor engage in dialogue to address many of these issues. That's the point. I assume that taxpayers believe that the Cuban Twitter program, given our fiscal constraints, was in the best interest of our national security, given that Cuba is on the state-sponsored list of terrorists. Or terrorism. It's one of the state sponsors that you guys continue to say, you know, we need to deal with as such. So I just want to see how much money could you lay out the taxpayers paid for this, given that I'm sure it's also in our national security interest. Secondly, trying to get a better understanding of how USAID works with the United Nations as it relates to Haiti in terms of the fight against the cholera epidemic and how you prioritize the funding for cholera, addressing cholera in Haiti. Finally, your cut, I think, in the tuberculosis funding, I believe it's 19% from last year. And so I'd like to get a handle on why you're proposing to cut the TB budget, particularly in light of the strong relationship between HIV and AIDS and TB as it relates to it being an opportunistic disease. Thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman. On Cuba, I'll just acknowledge your perspective, and I understand the point you make about the embargo. My priority has been taking the law, implementing it, and ensuring that our implementation of it was well managed. And the GAO report was important at validating that approach. And I'll leave it at that. The program was one. The program you're referring to, there were a number of inaccuracies in the AP story, so we can share with you the point-by-point rebuttal that we put out publicly, was $1.3 million over a number of years, and for that, about 68,000 Cubans were able to be part of a text messaging communication system. In terms of the UN and cholera, cholera has been a priority for our health and water and sanitation programs in Haiti. Our rural health programs there have been extraordinarily effective at reducing the rate of child mortality related to cholera to under the 1% WHO target, and we've done that hand in glove with the UN. And so we will continue to make those investments. We've also tried to do that in a way that builds out a proper health system. So it's not just going and putting out a fire, but it's rather making sure that clinics are well stocked, making sure that the full range of child health interventions are available to kids, especially in rural Haiti. And in some of the districts, we've even invested in secondary care, maternity hospitals, to help improve maternal health outcomes, and to do that in a way that's tied back to some of the higher order hospitals that were mentioned earlier in the hearing. In terms of TB, this has been a success story. We've had a 50% reduction in TB mortality. The United States has 3 primary accounts for supporting this. The first is USAID's bilateral account. The largest is PEPFAR's bilateral account, which at $180 or $190 million is a significant investment. And the other one is our resource gift to the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria. In addition to significantly increasing our Global Fund commitments over the past several years, we just helped the Global Fund Board increase its allocation within its fund responsibilities to tuberculosis from, I think, 14 to 18% or something along those lines. So we could get you more details on it, but I want to assure you, having worked on this issue, visited programs, built partnerships with local private sector companies and the countries like Brazil, China, India, and Russia that account for a lot of existing TB mortality, getting them to do more and recognizing that those are middle-income countries that should take more responsibility has been our kind of focus.
Thank you. This time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shah again. Maybe we can set up a phone call with Senator Harkin and I, because the way you answered the question about the seed program, it still doesn't say if it finishes in June, whether that's it for that program. So I would like to follow up.
Okay.
I don't want to take up my time on that, but I'm going to talk to Senator Harkin and follow up. There's 2 community colleges in Texas. I don't think they're in my district. One's in El Paso. I think it's Beto O'Rourke. The other one, I don't know, it's in San Antonio. I represent part of San Antonio, Alamo College. I don't think it's mine. I don't know if it's Lamar Smith or somebody else, but just for that. But I'd like to follow up. The second thing is if you can also follow up later, the $10 million that we increased and y'all decreased, if you can specifically tell us what you're looking at doing with that. And then my question for right now is your Central Asia regional for $16.9 million. Y'all going to continue that cross-border training for the new Silk Road initiatives. Can you just quickly tell me what countries are included in the Silk Road initiative?
Yes. So let me, on seed, I'll commit to that call, and I'd be eager to do it. I think both those community colleges have been consulted by our team, but we'd be eager to do that. On Mexico, I would just suggest, and we'll follow up with the numbers, I have that in our FY14 request, we had 45 plus the 10, and in our FY15 request, we have 47.5 plus 12.5. So those, maybe those are different from what you have, but we'll work that through, and I'll make sure my teams are clear about that. Either way, we've carefully reviewed this program, and the investments are, as you know, part of Merida. We believe, and we re-bid a new project that is focused on justice sector reform, and the results from the effort are quite extraordinary. You know, in communities where we work versus don't work, we're seeing very, very strong, quantified, evaluated results, speeding up trials, speeding up getting the process moving, and making criminal justice more effective. So I'd appreciate the chance maybe offline to go into this in more detail.
I'd like to do that, because again, what we got from folks there at the agency department, they gave us different numbers, so I'd like to make sure we're on the same page.
And with respect to the New Silk Road, this is, I think, part of an effort we call the Almaty Consensus, but it's an effort to have Afghanistan and its neighbors work on more regional integration, trade, and energy partnerships. And actually, recently, we just concluded an agreement that will help Afghanistan get access to about 1,300 megawatts of energy that will be sold from Tajikistan and other places. So I will make sure we follow up on which specific countries are part of this, but the initiative is defined pretty broadly to include the region broadly, and then within that there are specific priorities in energy, in trade transit, in customs clearance times, and in improving infrastructure and connectivity.
Just, if you can follow on those countries, I have the stance countries, I have Azerbaijan and Georgia, but if y'all can follow up on those
Okay.
just to make sure we're on the same initiative.
We'd be happy to. Thank
Yeah,
you,
we
sir.
have some proposed language, and we want to make sure we're on the same page as yours.
Good. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Doctor. Appreciate your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the gentleman from Florida for 3 minutes, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before you begin, somebody's got a computer too close to the microphone, I think. Oh. Okay, there you go.
That would be me.
Restart the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus for a minute on nutrition and just the concerns that I know a number of people have expressed on some of the proposed cuts in the budget in nutrition programs. Congressman Diaz-Balart and I have worked together on the 1,000 Days resolution, and you know we think obviously addressing child hunger and nutrition is worldwide is critically important, and I know you do as well. So can you give us an update on the new nutrition initiative, which I think isn't very well understood, and how that proposes to address our priorities around nutrition and child hunger in the face of what seems like cuts to programs that are designed to be effective?
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership on 1,000 Days. It's one of my favorite examples of bringing updated science and knowledge of what works to a field that's been kind of ongoing for a long time, but now has an opportunity to dramatically reduce stunting in particular. In May, we will launch a new USAID strategy on nutrition that will effectively serve as an investment plan to back up a series of commitments the Obama administration made in the G8 last year. And the most important commitment was that we would spend almost $1 billion over a 3-year period in nutrition-specific interventions from agriculture, health, and core supplemental feeding in that 1,000-day window. And what we will articulate are the countries we're prioritizing, the specific stunting targets we hope to achieve with the effort, the need to use and leverage resources from our Feed the Future programs in those countries to ensure that we're tackling agriculture and nutrition together. And I have had the chance to discuss with the NGO community quite a lot this effort. And I think it's very important because it starts to bring together health, agriculture, nutrition against a common goal, which is ensuring that children in particular are not debilitated and stunted over the course of their lives because of a lack of access to adequate nutrition in the first 1,000 days. And it has personal significance to me because I come from a long history of Indian Americans, many of whom are stunted, so in past generations. But when you're like 2 feet taller than your grandmother, it hits home. So we have an opportunity to actually do this well. It'll be, I think, a strong effort, and I think what we put in the budget was 101 or 115 on the nutrition line item, but that's just one component of what an integrated nutrition strategy can accomplish. America leads the world in this area, and so it's appropriate that we have a strategy and a target and a goal and the ability to report on what we're doing.
I'll recognize myself for 3 minutes. Dr. Shah, is USAID deploying any new technologies beyond the monitoring evaluation to ensure that when problems are discovered in the M&E process, reasonable steps are being taken to actually resolve those problems, not just learn from them for the future? And do you need any further specific support or flexibility to ensure that you're able to watch projects even after completion and take reasonable steps to resolve the problems once identified?
Well, thank you, Congressman. We have put in place a very aggressive monitoring and evaluation strategy. It was actually recognized by the American Evaluation Association as a best practice. As a result of that effort, relative to 4 or 5 years ago when we produced maybe 10 or 20 coherent evaluations on an annual basis, we now do about 280 a year. They're all available on an iPhone app that you can go to the App Store, download the app, and then you'd be the 15th person to use it. And I love it. It's great if you have long flights. But the reality is we know that 50% of our evaluations are used for mid-course program corrections, and we are also doing post-program evaluations in certain cases as well. I support the efforts you've made and others, like Congressman Poe, to really kind of put forth a vision that all of our major programs should be coherently evaluated and we should learn from that. And I think USAID kind of leads the charge in terms of getting that done and making that data publicly available. In terms of using new technology for that work, in many cases we have third-party evaluations, which is a best practice in the industry. And in many cases we do use technology, whether it's kind of SMS data from program participants to make sure teachers are showing up at the schools, or satellite imagery to track crop yields, as I just saw we're doing in Nepal through a partnership with NASA. But in general, the goal is to be kind of cost-effective in how we do the evaluations.
Thank you. Now, in the interest of time, I will submit my 5 additional questions for the record. Hope you can respond to those at a later date. Again, want to thank you, Dr. Shah, again, for your time today. Thank you for coming. This concludes today's hearings. And again, members may submit any additional questions for the record. The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs stands adjourned.